IBO World Champion, La Bella Bestia, coming to you to show my appreciation for the ring IQ. So if you haven't already,
get guard, but
wow,
Howard,
look at the strength.
follow and subscribe Ring IQ and check out the relay where they cover today's top boxing news.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, and now it's time for our weekend recap. We're going to start it off with the Bridges versus Gangloff bantamweight fight. The running theme with this card really was the unexpected, because I didn't expect Maelys Gangloff to decide to box.
That's what she did with Ellie Scottney.
That shouldn't be interpreted as a knock on Maelys Gangloff, because it was the right strategy. Ahead of this fight, I figured Ebony Bridges is a very heavy-handed puncher, and because Maelys Gangloff is often so static, so square, it may work against her, and it may get her knocked out. And what she did in the actual fight, once the fight kicked off and the opening bell rung, was she used the ring.
That was smart.
We have to recognize the improvement in Maelys Gangloff, because that was the right strategy. If you're in there with a heavy-handed pressure fighter, a heavy-handed puncher, the last thing you want to do is stand in front of them.
Because then you're doing half the work for them.
Maelys Gangloff got off to a rough start while trying to use the ring to her advantage, trying to keep space between her and Ebony Bridges, who doubled up on her jab whilst closing the gap, landed several big right hands from the first round to the third round, all of which I scored for.
Blonde bomber.
Behind pressure, volume, and meaningful punches, eye-catching punches. Rounds 1 through 3, I scored for Ebony Bridges. I had Maelys Gangloff behind movement, accuracy, boxing, picking up the 4th round. Ebony Bridges just nicking the 5th.
Maelys Gangloff sweeping the 6th through the 8th.
Which was a draw on my scorecard. You heard that right. I didn't have Ebony Bridges winning this fight. And I want to say, given how things were going from the 7th to the 8th rounds, if this were a 10-rounder, if this were a 10-round fight, Ebony Bridges would have lost that thing. In fact, I think she was very fortunate to walk away with the W, because in the eyes of a lot of people,
she was unraveling.
She was starting to come apart at the seams. At some point in either the 5th round or the 6th round, she hurts her right hand. Her right hand that she was having a lot of success with in the early goings of this fight. The right hand that was buzzing France's Maelys Gangloff. At some point, something happens to it, and the aesthetic of the match completely changes.
She gets injured.
And she's visibly gassed. She's getting tired. She's getting hit. The tide begins to turn for Maelys Gangloff.
Because Ebony couldn't land with authority anymore.
It went from the blonde bomber walking her opponent down, stalking her prey to land big shots, to Ebony attempting to fight her off, reduced to throwing arm punches that don't have a lot of mustard on them.
She was getting her head snapped back in the 8th round.
She was getting hit clean. I want to say that this is not the Maelys Gangloff that I expected. I expected a front foot heavy, aggressive Maelys Gangloff that came to bang, and we got a Maelys Gangloff that came to box. And I think that, you know what? It worked to her advantage.
It really was the right strategy.
Because you could see the difference in power in those opening rounds, and you could see that the right hand of Ebony Bridges was bothering Maelys Gangloff.
Was affecting her.
You could see that the movement of Maelys Gangloff was affecting Ebony Bridges. That movement, that bought Maelys Gangloff more time
to get back in this fight.
Had she been more aggressive through the early goings of this fight, stood in front of Ebony more often, she would have made herself that much easier to hit, an easier target.
She might have got stopped.
Myself, I had this thing a draw. I had it 4 rounds to 4. Ebony was very fortunate to walk away with a W that a lot of people aren't even sure that she earned. Hell, I saw a lot of people saying they think Ebony lost the fight. These are people that are usually quite critical of the blonde bomber. Thus, I don't know if that's affecting the way they score this fight, and if this isn't just them relishing the opportunity to see her lose again. Your guess is as good as mine. But if you want to know how I had it, I had the thing a draw, and I think Ebony was very fortunate to get that W.
She really was.
I believe that the average recovery time is anywhere between 3 to 6 weeks, maybe more, depending on the severity. And Ebony, I think that she may be out of commission for what remains of 2021. We may not see her back in the ring, may not see her back in action till next year. That's unfortunate because she was gaining momentum. She was gaining steam. You know, she had a fight not that long ago before the Gangloff fight, the Beck Connolly fight. But time spent away from Bruce, her cat, her significant other. I think that Ebony is going to take this as an opportunity to recuperate and fly back home to Australia.
Sit out the rest of the year.
She might have to nurse that hand so that she's fully prepared, fully recuperated for the following year and what big fights may come.
I think she's very lucky here.
I think she was very fortunate to walk away from this fight with a W because she's got a draw on my scorecard. She's got a loss on several others. I'm not sure what the motivation for those individuals is. I just know that on my card, I didn't necessarily see Ebony win this fight. I saw her survive it.
She's got to rest that hand.
I'll say this much. Up until the hand was broken, it really was all one-way traffic in this fight. It was Ebony Bridges landing big right hand after big right hand, and those...
Repeated stress on the hand is what broke it.
Let's not take things out of context here.
That broken hand affected how the fight played out.
We saw Maxie Hughes beat the brakes off of Giovanni Straffon in what was a one-sided fight, one-sided contest. Not that much to reflect upon there. The Conor Benn versus Adrian Granados welterweight fight. That's a fight that, like the Bridges versus Gangloff fight, it wasn't what I anticipated. It wasn't what I expected. I expected Adrian Granados to engage a lot more than he did. I expected Adrian Granados to make it a firefight. I mean, if you see Adrian Granados...
If you've seen him, that's what he's good for.
Windy City Fighter, more often than not, is involved in a lot of tear-ups, a lot of Donnybrooks, a lot of mid-range to inside firefights, and that's not what we got yesterday.
I thought the guy came to bang and he came to box.
You really can't hold it against him either, because it's not Adrian Granados' job to make himself easier to hit for Conor Benn. It's his job to give the man opposite the ring some resistance, give him something to have to work around. Had Adrian Granados engaged more with Conor Benn, Conor wouldn't have struggled as much as he did, because it was the movement, after all, that bothered Conor. The movement and rolling shots, rolling punches. Conor would try to get a good salvo going, but it wouldn't land flush. It wouldn't land clean. Adrian Granados rolled, slipped, slided around a lot of those shots.
He was riding a lot of those punches.
So even if you're scoring this thing and you're giving the majority of the rounds to Conor Benn on the strength of his aggressiveness and his activity, it wasn't without
He
its...
exposed some holes in Conor.
Listen, that's okay. That's not the end of the world. That's what these fights are for. Developing the fighter. Hot takes aside, I mean, what's boxing without boxing fans jumping to dramatic conclusions? No, I don't think Conor looked all that great yesterday. I didn't. But I wouldn't throw the whole fighter away behind that performance either. He looked great against Formella, didn't he? Sebastian Formella. And he looked great against Samuel Vargas as well. Yesterday, against the movement of Adrian Granados, that exposed certain deficiencies that Conor might have. You know, he might need to invest a little bit more time in learning how to cut off the ring, not headhunt as much.
Should have spent a little bit more time downstairs than upstairs.
Watching this fight, I felt like Conor's winging a lot of shots, a lot of headshots, and Adrian Granados is riding a lot of those shots, so he's not actually accumulating very much damage on Adrian Granados. You have a moving target that's fighting on the balls of their feet, and if you want to take their legs away, you focus on the body.
Focus on his body shot.
There's a lot of talk about perhaps making an Adrian Bronier fight beyond this Adrian Granados fight, and I think that Fast Eddie was getting ahead of himself because Adrian Granados just surprised you with his movement and his boxing. And if Adrian Granados can go out there and make you look like that...
The other Adrian.
Adrian Broner. He's even more defensively responsible than Adrian Granados is. Adrian Granados is not characteristically a defensive wizard. Whereas Adrian Broner, he's so defensively minded at times, he's been accused of not fighting.
If you struggle to hit Granados, you'll struggle to hit Adrian Broner.
I'm just giving it to you straight. It's the only way I know how to give it to you. I think that Conor needs to tread carefully here.
I don't know, maybe they'll let him fight Florian Marco.
There was some talk about that fight, some buzz around it. That's a possible avenue of opportunity for Conor to play it safe and fight in a more winnable fight than what else the welterweight division has to offer. There's a seasoned veteran in Ivan Redcatch.
Passing that guy around like a doobie in a suburban kid's basement.
Kids don't use doobies anymore. They're into bongs now.
Point is, he's been getting beat up by a lot of guys.
I don't get the sense that behind that performance, Fast Eddie is going to step Conor up just yet. He'll probably give him an easy one before the next step up in competition. And you know, this fight, like the Bridges fight, it looked good on paper, and you thought it was going to be a shootout. You thought it was going to be all action, and it ended up being a boxing match.
And that's not a knock on Granados.
Or a knock on Connor, for that matter. But when you get two guys that are characteristically involved in action fights, you expect an action fight, not a boxing match, and that's what we got.
It was a forgettable fight.
We then come to the lightweight undisputed title fight, undisputed title tilt, the co-main to the main, fight between Katie Taylor and Jennifer Hahn. A fight that
Didn't have much razzmatazz.
didn't have much pizzazz. Jennifer Hahn moved up to the lightweight division last year in February.
And she got pregnant.
She didn't have much experience at this weight, though it is clear that she had outgrown the featherweight division, where she was the reigning IBF champion. She completely skipped the super featherweight division and decided to move up to lightweight.
I didn't give Jennifer much chance of winning this fight.
She's a capable boxer, no doubt about it, but under these circumstances, at this weight, I didn't give her any kind of odds to do very much in there.
I think she'd be better off going down to 130 pounds.
Just one man's opinion. Feel free to disagree. In this fight, you know, Jennifer Hahn's movement, it did help to offset the aggression of Katie Taylor. Katie couldn't have it all her way, firing off salvos and combinations, lighting up her opponent like a Christmas tree. Not here, and not with Jennifer Hahn, who was boxing from the outside behind straight shots, moving around that ring, using it
Katie didn't get to have it all her way.
like some would have expected, but there was a clear difference in speed here. From the opening round, you could see that Katie Taylor's not going to have too much trouble connecting with the jab, the lead hand on Jennifer Hahn. It's following up that may be an issue, as Jennifer Hahn will either move out of range or
Collapse the pocket.
tie Katie Taylor up and try to smother her work. We often see this with Katie Taylor's opponents. When they can't deal with the speed and the combinations, they'll opt to smother her work instead. Turn into a clinch fest. I'll tell you that Jennifer Hahn's performance wasn't all that ambitious. She wasn't really going for it with Katie, and because she's not going for it with Katie, because she's being defensively responsible, she's limiting the opportunities for Katie
To land hard shots.
look good doing it. It's a situation to where Katie is fighting to the level of her opponent.
And her opponent's not really going for
A
it.
very different aesthetic than what we got in Katie Taylor's last fight with Natasha Jonas. A very different aesthetic to what we got from Katie in the Delphine Pursoon fights.
Rose Volante fight.
The Eva Wallstrom fight, the list goes on. You got an opponent in front of you that's fighting a mostly defensive fight, fighting behind straight shots, moving laterally.
Not really trading shots.
They are effectively moving and putting distance between themselves and Katie Taylor. So the aesthetic of the match, a good portion of it, is Katie Taylor trying to get within range to land shots. And she might touch Jennifer with the jab, but when she goes to follow up, things get messy. Things get scrappy. Fight progresses, starts to go into the deep waters. Both fighters get the chance to stretch their sea legs, and we start to see a little bit more aggression from Jennifer Hahn, though the difference in speed was palpable. The difference in speed was visible. What you saw is Katie Taylor landing a lot of pot shots, a lot of singles. She was effectively beating Jennifer Hahn to the punch, and that's what I expected. The 8th round rolls around. One of the more dominant rounds for Katie Taylor. She was snapping Jennifer's head back a few times in that round. Lets off a flurry that sees Jennifer Hahn hit the deck. Jennifer Hahn protests. She feels that it was a slip, though it was off a fast flurry. It was at the end of a combination that she hit the deck, so looked like a knockdown. Listen, the takeaway for me from this fight is that Jennifer Hahn didn't look half bad out there, in spite of the circumstances, having not fought in over a year, February of last year, giving birth to her second child. Jennifer didn't look out of place. She didn't look like a fish out of water once the fight progressed and she had a couple of rounds in the bank. In the early goings of this fight, she looked like a deer in the headlights, but she found her stride and she did all right out there. And I would like to see more of Jennifer Hahn moving forward, perhaps not at lightweight, but at super featherweight.
Katie had to work for it more than I expected.
She had to go out there and find the openings more often than not because Jennifer Hahn wasn't throwing caution to the wind. She was offsetting that aggression with movement and a jab of her own, straight shots. So
It's not one of Katie's more memorable fights.
I think a lot of people heard the circumstances for Jennifer Hahn ahead of this match, and they anticipated that Katie was just going to go in there and have her way with her, and Jennifer Hahn made things difficult. She made Katie have to work for it. I mean, even if the fight never got away from Katie,
She still had to track her down and find those openings.
neither one of them was ready to throw caution to the wind, really. So, while it wasn't one of Katie's best performances, it certainly wasn't one of her worst. The fight was a bit of a forgettable fight. Not very many highlight reel moments outside of that knockdown in the 8th round. With that, Katie Taylor advances to a professional record of 19-0. They're talking about bringing her back out before the year is out in December. Against who? Your guess is as good as mine, and we'll talk about that moving forward. Final thoughts on this one. It wasn't a bad fight. It just really wasn't a great fight either. It's not the kind of fight that stays with you. Perhaps it was a more even contest than most people anticipated ahead of the match.
I think that Jennifer deserves credit for that.
Finally, to the main event of this same card, Josh Warrington versus Mauricio Lara 2. The main event that didn't get to fully play out, and we all know why.
Cut.
Josh Warrington
Headbutt.
had a clash of heads with Mauricio Lara.
The fight got stopped after the 2nd round.
I had Josh Warrington picking up the 1st round and Mauricio Lara coming on strong, picking up the 2nd round. And who knows what would have happened after that? If you ask around, a lot of people think it was going to be a repeat. A lot of people think Mauricio was going to do to Josh in the 2nd fight what he already did to him in the 1st. And maybe they're right. I don't know. I'm not a fortune teller.
Eddie Hearn thinks Josh was going to win a fight.
And of course he's going to say that, though ultimately, none of us know. The fight got stopped. And it's not looking like there's going to be a 3rd, because that cut Mauricio Lara suffered, it's going to take some time for that to heal. And they're not going to hold up Josh Warrington's entire career waiting for that.
We're already hearing rumblings that they may get him back out there.
As strange as this might sound, this fight ending the way that it did may have helped Josh Warrington dodge a bullet that will add more shelf life to his career.
I don't know if he was going to win that fight, and we don't know if he wasn't.
What we do know is that 20,000 fight fans over there in Leeds showed up to see it happen. Josh Warrington still is a ticket seller. He still is a marquee fighter across the pond. And Eddie Hearn knows that. So why put your guy in harm's way for a 3rd time when you know Mauricio Lara's injured and you know he may be out for a while?
Gruesome cut heals.
Josh Warrington, he didn't suffer any injuries, no cuts, bumps, or scrapes, because this fight didn't last long enough for him to accumulate any. So you probably can get this guy out there one more time before the year is out against a more safe opponent choice than Mauricio Lara.
And maybe you revisit that fight?
Or maybe you sick Lara on Kid Galahad, who I think stands a better chance of beating Mauricio Lara, given his style.
Styles, after all, they do make fights.
And then you have the winner of that fight lock horns with Josh Warrington, regardless of who it is, whether it's Mauricio Lara in a trilogy or Kid Galahad in a rematch. I mean, one way or another, I'm not getting the sense that Josh Warrington's next fight is going to be Mauricio. I'm not getting the sense he's going to sit on the shelf waiting for that guy to heal. I think they're going to get this guy back out there one more time, and we don't know if he's ever going to fight Mauricio again, though if he does, it is a risk. That much we do know.
Is the headbutt deliberate?
Things were getting rough for Josh in that 2nd round, so it might have been. Mauricio was starting to come on.
I started having flashbacks of the first fight.
And for a moment there, it looked like Josh Warrington was having those flashbacks too, so maybe he resorted to some roughhouse tactics to try and get this guy off him. It's neither here nor there anymore. It doesn't even matter now. Fight's over.